Welcome, Internet world. Munch, munch, gobble, gobble. My stepson gave me this. I don't know if you can see it. So, anyway, I'm going to talk about why I no longer support Ben Shapero. And don't get me wrong, he says some really good things. He says some great things. But there are some serious problems. One, he doesn't believe people with mental illness have a right to self-defense. He doesn't think they have a right to have guns. If somebody is mentally ill, and if you look at the DSM, frankly, especially the DSM, what is it, DSM-5, the new one, which I don't have a copy of. I have the DSM-4TR. It's like that thick. It's been years since I've read it, but just about anybody can be labeled mentally ill. So, and having been through that system myself, is that redundant to say I've been through it myself? Well, I've been through that system, not here, but in Texas. And look, it can be awful. I can tell you stories about abuse. I can tell you stories about psychiatrists that have no business being doctors, and so forth and so on. But Ben Shapero supports Trump. Donald Trump supports red flag laws. Donald Trump supports banning bump stocks. And whenever I listen to Ben Shapero, it's the same thing over and over again. Now, oh goodness, I forgot his name. Dave Rubin. I really like Dave Rubin. I watched a video yesterday with Dave Rubin, Christina Hoff Sommers, and I forget the other person that was there. I forget his name. But I really like that. I really like how Dave Rubin is calm. He'll talk to people that disagree with him. You know, like Dave Rubin, he's gay, he's married to a guy, yet he'll sit down with somebody that disagrees with gay marriage, who disagrees with homosexuality, and they'll have a civil conversation. And that's how you get ideas. The better ideas eventually wind up winning that way. You know, and being from Franco, Spain, I can tell you that Antifa is not anti-fascist. They are behaving like fascists. I have a book. It's not in this room. It's in the living room. And don't ask me how my parents were able to obtain that book, because I have no freaking idea. And this is when we were living in España, in Spain. And what's the title of it? Spain: A Modern History? Maybe, I'm not sure if that's the title or not. Something similar to that. And it's definitely not pro-Franco. Spain, during that time, if you had literature that criticized Franco, criticized his regime, etc., you could be killed, disappeared, go to prison, be tortured. So how my parents were able to have that in the house is beyond me. And knowing myself, it's probably good that we left, because I would have been critical of the regime, and I probably wouldn't have lived very long. But you know, we had to show our ID, and you know, we have that more and more in this country, where you have to show your ID. You have to have it on you more and more. And you know, Ben Shapero also I'm forgetting words here. He slandered Dr. Ron Paul. He slandered Ron Paul. He should know better than to do that. He lied about Ron Paul. And now, me getting into the libertarian movement, if you will, that happened before Ron Paul. I was brought up as a Democrat. In my, I think it was my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, I switched to the Republican Party. That lasted about 5 minutes because I saw their hypocrisy. When Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House, and now they're trying to rehabilitate him. One of their part of the platform was to end baby killing and abortion. And my wife, in the other room, she's far to the left of me politically, and she and I agree on abortion. We don't like it. And my first wife, my late wife, she was maybe even more conservative than I am, and she and I agreed on abortion. Now, the one thing that my late wife and my current wife do disagree on is the death penalty, but you know, we disagree, and we don't hate each other for it. We don't argue about it. We don't, you know, we disagree, so we disagree. Unlike, you know, Antifa and BLM, etc., you can disagree with somebody and still love them. You know, I mean, I guess it really doesn't matter if we agree or disagree more on more things or fewer things, because it's, you know, we love each other, so that's what matters. But anyway, so when Ben Shapero slanders Ron Paul, when Ben Shapero supports a president that is not a conservative, he's a neoconservative, a socialist, in other words. He's a socialist. Ben Shapero supports a president that wants a ban on bump stocks, who supports having red flag laws. Ben Shapero opposes people with mental illness owning firearms. Who's to decide who has a mental illness? Who's going to make that decision? Mr. Shapiro, are you going to make that decision? Who's going to make that decision? Like I said, you look at the DSM, just about anybody, if not anyone and everyone, can be labeled mentally ill. There was one psychiatrist that I had, oh gosh. He worked 7 days a week. During the week, he had regular business hours at his office, and then he would see every single one of his patients in every single hospital that his patients were in. So he would be working till like midnight, and you'd go see him in his office and he'd fall asleep on you. It's not that he was like, not like that, but he would, because he was only getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. He would show up like at Methodist Specialty. This was in San Antonio, Texas. He would, you know, after work, he'd go to the cafeteria at the hospital. He'd get something to eat. His shirt and his tie would be covered with food because he'd fall asleep while he was eating. And I did not know this before I first saw him, but he had been reprimanded by the state board of medical examiners for inappropriate contact or inappropriate conduct with patients. So the first time I saw him in his office, his nurse was in there. His nurse, oh, well, I just like to sit in. Well, it turns out that he was supposed to have somebody in there in order to keep his license. He had to have somebody in there. Well, I didn't know that. That nurse was only in there once. But this guy was freaking nuts. And then I found out later, after I had left Texas, that he had been reprimanded again. This time, he lost his license. Well, he was allowed to retire his license. For those who don't know, like my mother was a nurse, she was an RN. You can let your license go inactive. You can retire your license, or you can keep your license updated. And this doctor, I'm not going to say his name, he's dead now anyway, he wound up in trouble for prescribing unnecessary medicine and inappropriate contact with patients. This was at least the second time, and he was allowed to retire his license, which meant no more medical practice. Now, who do you think was mentally ill? I think that doctor was mentally ill, and it's just my opinion, but I think he committed suicide. Okay, I mean, he didn't have his license anymore, he couldn't practice medicine. That was his life, I guess. I mean, when you work 18, 19, 20 hours a day, that's really not healthy. There was another shrink at the county hospital. Now, I had seen this guy for I don't know how many years. He never learned my name. Every time I saw him, he had to look in his records to see who I was. And firearms Policy Coalition, they've talked about it. I'll try and provide a couple of links if I can remember, if I can find the links, to two organizations that actually deal with mental illness and firearms. Let me tell you about red flag laws. There are people in Keene, New Hampshire that detest me. They, the leader of this group of people is a pedophile. He has a radio show that's on like 2 radio stations. He had a victim who was 14 years old, and he was in his 30s. He sponsors, excuses if you're sensitive, close your ears, but he sponsors orgies, and he knowingly spreads STDs. His victim, in New Hampshire, the age of consent is 16, which I think it should be higher, but in New Hampshire it is only 16. But that girl was 14 years old. Maybe she was younger when he started abusing her, I don't know. But she stayed with him for several years. She eventually saw him for what he is and left him. By then she was, I think, in her early 20s. But if you look at how he talked about her as a child, not as an equal. Having been abused myself in mental institutions, a lot of the staff that worked in those places, they were sicker than we were. I mean, they really were. And they weren't always mental institutions. Sometimes it was either these charges are going to be filed against you, or you go to this institution. Which do you want? Well, I was young, I was naive, and I was mad, and I said, try me as an adult. That would have not been a good thing for me, but back then that's how I thought. But I'm saying anybody, first of all, these are some crazy people that are psychiatrists. Not all of them. There are some very good psychiatrists. I can think of 2 that I had. Both were in the Houston area. One may have had a TV show, because there's these crime shows that I like to watch, and on some of them there's a doctor, and I haven't seen his name spelled out, but I've only heard it mentioned, and I have hearing loss. I have significant hearing loss, so things sound differently to me. So I'm not sure if that's his name, but he looks like he's maybe too young to have been that person. But at the same time, he kind of looks similar to him, and he does have either the same or similar name. He was a good doctor. And then the doctor that I was seeing before him was a good doctor as well. Although that doctor's in his 90s now. Somehow he still practices psychiatry. I don't know how he does it in his 90s. But I don't go out and commit crimes. I don't harm people. Yet Ben Shapero would not want me to have guns. And with the red flag laws, these crazies in Keene, New Hampshire would tell the police, hey, this guy has made a threat, this guy is insane, and they would come at 2 or 3 in the morning, kick the door in. Or they'd come and say, we're going to take your guns. You know, so I'm going to get rid of my guns. I'm getting rid of my guns. So I just hopefully won't have to deal with that. But I actually got one out, was looking at it, making sure it was in good order to sell. Actually, I put everything away except for these. These are just Allen wrenches because I had to do some. Oh, this works. It's a laser and flashlight. Although you can't. Oh, there. But you have to twist it to get it on and off. I should have put that back on there. So that basically, it's going to be worth more with things like that than just by itself. You know, Ben Shapero, like I said, he says some great things, but he says the same things over and over again. He says people with mental illness shouldn't have guns. He supports a president that is opposed to the Second Amendment, who supports red flag laws, who opposes bump stocks. The deficit is actually going up, not down. I'll actually provide a link to help show that, you know, the GOP and the DNC, they're really not that different. It's like, you know, if you've ever watched The Wizard of Oz, there's somebody behind the curtain controlling things, and that's how I feel about politics in our country, because things don't ever seem to really get better. And then you have the wall. I don't support a wall. Simply enforce the laws that already exist. All the money that'll be spent on a wall could be spent on other things. As for troop withdrawal from Syria, I seriously doubt it. It'll be a troop withdrawal like Obama had, which was no troop withdrawal, or you withdraw a few troops, and then a few weeks or months later, you actually increase, you know, you up the numbers that were higher than were there before that. So you know, frankly, you know, there are psychiatrists that would label Ben Shapero as psychiatrically deficient. You know, if you again look at the DSM and look at some of these doctors that do the diagnosis, they're not necessarily normal people. You know, some of them have some real serious problems. You know, they're not people I would rely on. I mean, if I could go to see a psychiatrist, from my experience, most of those that I've dealt with, I wouldn't want anything to do with. They're freaking nuts. A lot of them are also control freaks. I don't know why that is, but a lot of psychiatrists are control freaks. So I guess that's all I really have to say. I'll try and remember about the links, see if I can remember all the links, but bye.